I'm going to discuss our action plan to make America great again.
And Trump is already acting, intervening to keep jobs in the U.S. and naming a retired Marine general to lead the Pentagon.
We are going to appoint Mad Dog Mattis as our Secretary of Defense.
Then insults fly when top officials from the Clinton and Trump campaigns meet at a Harvard forum.
I would rather lose than win the way you guys did.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes.
We'll get the latest on that and the Trump transition live from top advisor Kellyanne Conway. Then Green Party presidential nominee Jill Stein, who's pushing for recounts in 3 states Donald Trump won narrowly. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Plus, we'll ask our Sunday panel what Democrats should do now after their members in the House re-elect Nancy Pelosi as their leader. And our Power Player of the Week, veterans training service dogs and healing themselves.
That human-animal bond has worked better than any other intervention that I'm aware of.
All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. This week, Donald Trump demonstrated for any doubters still out there just how unconventional a president he will be, intervening directly to keep 1,000 jobs from going to Mexico, holding a campaign-style rally where he continued to bash the media, and holding conversations with foreign leaders that break with decades of U.S. diplomacy. Joining me now from Trump Transition Headquarters in New York, Kellyanne Conway, one of Mr. Trump's top advisors. And Kellyanne, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Let's start with the controversy over the call that Mr. Trump took this week from Taiwan's President Tsai, the first time leaders of our two countries have, to the best of our knowledge, spoken since the U.S. broke off relations in 1979. Now, you say that Mr. Trump was fully briefed, knew what he was doing before this call, which raises the question, does he intend to change our one China policy, which recognizes only Beijing?
Well, President-elect Trump is well aware of our one China policy. He accepted a congratulatory call from the president of Taiwan. That marks probably the 48th or 50th world leader that has reached out to the president-elect or the vice president-elect, Mike Pence, since they won the election last month, Chris. They've talked to the prime ministers or presidents of Israel, of Singapore, of Japan, of China.
But this one's different. So the question, I guess, is, does this signal a change in policy, or was it just a phone call?
It was just a phone call at this point. It signals the fact that he accepted a congratulatory call. I know that China has a perspective on it. I know the White House and State Department probably have a perspective on it, and certainly Taiwan has a perspective on it. But the president-elect's perspective is that he accepted a congratulatory call, and when he's sworn in as president and commander-in-chief in a little over a month, Chris, he will make clear what the fullness of his plans are. But people shouldn't read too much into it. And some of the press coverage, not here necessarily, but elsewhere, is really astonishing when you think about how it was covered when Barack Obama was going to try to reach out to Iran and come up with an Iran nuclear deal. And this man the president-elect received a phone call from a world leader in another country. We know about one China. He knows about one China. He's routinely briefed on these matters, and that's just what it is.
So let me ask you about this. And I think one of the reasons such a big deal was made of it is because of the fact that the president-elect has had a number of controversial phone calls with foreign leaders. He reportedly told Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif he would, quote, play any role you want me to play to address and find solutions to the country's problems, despite Pakistan's relationship with terrorists. He also spoke with Philippine President Duterte, who's been accused of ordering the murder of thousands of suspected drug dealers, which raises the question, Kellyanne, why is Mr. Trump refusing the State Department's offer to brief him before these calls, and why is he skipping the daily briefings, intelligence briefings, that President Obama gets every day?
He is not always skipping those briefings, and he's briefed by any number of credible sources on these issues. And I think people, Chris, frankly, are cherry picking about these world leaders when then they're accusing the president-elect of somehow countenancing some of these behaviors in these other places. But look, that's really unfair when you think about, we just had an election, and the opponent, Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, was using the State Department to get money from foreign governments like Saudi Arabia, which doesn't even respect girls and women. So I think people just have their hair on fire, particularly those who believe we're still entrenched in the permanent campaign, are trying to reverse the election results from last week. Let's give this man time to form his cabinet. And he's also showing respect to the current president, President Obama, who still is the president for about 6.5 more weeks, and the commander-in-chief certainly. He's not out there, but President-elect Trump is not out there making policy or announcing new policy prescriptions worldwide. He's merely taking phone calls, and he will, I'm sure, re-engage with many of these leaders once he takes the oath of office.
Kellyanne, speaking of people with hair on fire, last week you went on several of the other Sunday talk shows to express the concern of Trump supporters about the consideration of Mitt Romney as Secretary of State. Here's a clip.
I'm hearing from people who say, hey, my parents died penniless, but I gave $216 to Donald Trump's campaign, and I would feel betrayed.
I know that you say Mr. Trump gave you permission, but there's a bigger question, which is that a proper way to treat somebody who is talking about accepting a role in public service?
Well, first, the president-elect has said he gave me permission. He's quoted in the New York Times and elsewhere saying that, and that's actually true. I would not say something publicly that I hadn't expressed privately, and I would never purposely embarrass him. He has my respect and my duty, frankly, my service. So
I'm not talking about Mr. Trump. I'm talking about Mr. Romney. Is that an appropriate way to treat a guy who is just discussing public service to say people are going to feel betrayed?
Well, first of all, I'm reflecting the news, not trying to make the news. I was astonished, Chris, that in a week when President-elect Trump told the New York Times on the record he would relook at waterboarding, he would relook at the Paris Accords on climate change. He was not particularly interested in focusing on prosecuting Hillary Clinton any further because he was focused on healthcare and immigration. He understands that other agencies and individuals are charged with that responsibility. But in a week when he said that, the breathtaking backlash was really about this particular prospective cabinet member. I would turn the question around and ask, was it appropriate for Governor Romney to stick his neck out so far in attacking Donald Trump, and never walking it back and never encouraging people to support the nominee once Mr. Trump had won the nomination squarely and fairly. So I've spoken my piece on that, and certainly the president-elect knows, and I've said publicly, and I will say here again, whatever he chooses and whomever he chooses has my full support and backing.
Yeah, but let me just
and he knows that.
Let me just quickly follow up on that. Clearly, Romney is under consideration. We just showed a picture of them having dinner on Tuesday night. If Mr. Trump picks Romney, what are you going to say to those Trump supporters who are going to feel betrayed?
I'm going to say to those Trump supporters what I say to those who did not vote for the new president-elect, Chris, some of whom seem to have a hard time accepting the fact that he is their president. I'm going to say to them, you have to work together. You have to accept his judgment. And the man is brilliant. The man is the best negotiator. He's the best connector and communicator, obviously. He just pulled off the upset of a century, perhaps. And the fact is that you have to trust his instincts and his judgment, because it's what brought so many people along to his movement in the first place, and it certainly is what inspires me daily to work with him. So everyone, I hope, will accept that, and the president-elect and the president-elect alone will make the decision as to whom he should have serving him at the highest levels of government.
Let's talk about Mr. Trump's instincts, because he went to Indiana this week to celebrate, after his intervention, the fact that Carrier is going to keep 1,000 jobs in the state. Here he is.
Listen, companies are not going to leave the United States anymore without consequences. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
But in an editorial Friday with the headline, Trump's Carrier Shakedown, the Wall Street Journal said America won't become more prosperous by forcing companies to make non-economic investments. A nation gets rich when individuals and business are allowed to take risks as they see fit in a competitive economy. Kellyanne, I don't have to tell you, that's the conservative view of how a free market works, and that politicians shouldn't be picking winners and losers. Sarah Palin calls this an example of crony capitalism.
Well, the president-elect just simply disagrees. And if you look at what happened, this is what leaders do. Certainly what people who have been wildly successful in building businesses across the globe, as the president-elect has been. You produce, you deliver, you achieve results. And everybody looks at the result here, which is about 1,100 workers are going to stay in Indiana. His running mate, the vice president-elect, is the governor of Indiana. And I think together they worked with Carrier. And, you know, everybody's looking at it as a stick. There are carrots. There are incentives here. They worked with Carrier to find a way together to keep those jobs here and not to go to Mexico. It's astonishing to see this happen. The current president could have done it. He never did it. The president elected it even before he was sworn in. And let me just say, those $7 million in incentives, they carry over 10 years. So about $700,000 per year in incentives, Chris, as part of this deal. That's about $785, maybe $800 per worker. So people have to put this in perspective before they act like it's some type of big-footed interventionist. This guy ran from day one on bringing back manufacturing jobs from China, Mexico, and elsewhere, and he's already delivered.
I want to get into two more subjects with you. One, Harvard's Institute of Politics holds a forum every 4 years where representatives of the winning and losing campaigns get together and try to have a kind of academic review of what happened and why one side won, one side lost. Well, it wasn't that way this year. It got pretty ugly, and here are some of the exchanges between you and Clinton Communications Director Jennifer Palmieri. Here they are.
Do you think I ran a campaign where white supremacists had a platform? You going to look me in the face and tell me that?
It did. Kellyanne
Really?
did. If providing a platform for white supremacists makes me a brilliant tactician,
That's
I
just
am
crap.
glad to have lost. I would rather lose than win the way you guys did.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes. Yes.
That's very clear today. No, you wouldn't, respectfully.
What did you take away from that?
Well, the rest of the exchange was me telling her and her team, as politely as I could, that you missed America. All you needed to do was recognize that a lot of voters had a very hard time accepting Hillary Clinton as this outsider disruptor who was ethically clean and would treat all Americans fairly, had to run an aspirational, uplifting campaign that had an economic message for a lot of working America. The idea that you know what, they can say what they want about me and my team. We've got very broad shoulders over here, as you can imagine. But to besmirch over 60 million hardworking men and women in this country who became part of the Trump movement, to pretend that Donald Trump was not out there every single day, Chris, sometimes 4, 5, 7 stops in a single day, bringing his case directly to the American people and saying what to them? That we're going to reform the Veterans Administration, which leaves veterans to die, that we're going to stand behind law enforcement and the thin blue line, that he's going to create 25 million jobs over 10 years, unleash energy investment, have an infrastructure program, repeal and replace Obamacare, which has really reduced the quality and the choice and the access and increased the price of health care for many Americans, left others behind, that he's going to defeat radical Islamic terrorism in the face of Hillary Clinton referring to them as our determined enemies, and President Obama saying that they're the JV team that's been brushed back. Nobody believes that.
Yep.
And so to besmirch those voters is really beyond the pale to me. Now, I had already, that was a 2.5-hour forum, and you're playing a couple clips, so I had already credited them as brilliant strategists, as people I respect as professionals. That was all done. But there was no grace, there was no congratulations from them, and frankly, there's no self-awareness that they lost the election because they missed America. They blame Bernie Sanders. They blame Jim Comey. It's typical of Hillary Clinton. In Hillary Clinton's world, it's always somebody else's fault.
All right, one last thing. I'm glad to see that this was such an academic discussion. Finally, we're going to, in a couple of moments, have Jill Stein on the program, the Green Party presidential nominee, who is pushing recounts in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. What do you say to her about those efforts?
I'd say to her, give it up, as it seems like you're doing in Pennsylvania, for a very simple reason. Even your friends in the Clinton campaign have admitted that these recounts will not change any result. Hillary Clinton gained a whopping 1 vote, Chris, 1. And so I read one article, the Daily Caller, I believe, that said at this pace, Hillary Clinton could change the election results in Wisconsin in 74 and a half years. I don't think America's going to sit around and wait for that to happen. The people have spoken. I was asked on this program and many others that will you accept the election results? So the question for Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton and those who just are still in the grief, anger, and denial stages, will you start moving over to acceptance and let this president-elect and vice president-elect get on with the business of government, have a peaceful transfer of power? The other thing is, I'm just astonished how Jill Stein is now the favorite flavor of the left. They ignored her and ridiculed her, and a lot of their friends in the media made sure she had no coverage and no oxygen.
I got to cut you off so I can get her on the show.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Wish her well for me, but yeah, I mean, gracious. Yeah, it's good to be gracious and to admit what you see in front of you. In this case, Donald Trump won 306 electoral votes, 30 of 50 states, 2,600 counties.
Okay.
It wasn't even close.
Kellyanne, thank you. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Chris.
It's not presidential to call up these massive leaders of business. I think it's very presidential. And if it's not presidential, that's okay. That's okay, because I actually like doing it.
Donald Trump speaking at the Carrier plant in Indianapolis this week after working out a deal to keep 1,000 jobs there from moving to Mexico. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Monica Crowley, editor and columnist for the Washington Times. Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Lisa Lehrer, who covers politics for the Associated Press. And from the Wall Street Journal, Kimberly Strassel. Well, Kim, you're a member of that Wall Street Journal editorial board that wrote that editorial that we just talked to Kellyanne Conway about, the Carrier shakedown. What about the argument that, look, this was a powerful, symbolic message that President Trump is going to have American workers' backs, and then when he gets into office in a month, that then he can begin macroeconomic changes like cutting taxes and rolling back regulation?
Look, I agree with all of that. I think politically this was very, very smart. This was a campaign promise he made and he fulfilled it. I'm just saying economically, this is not really the way you want to run an economy. We just had a president who for 8 years decided that they were going to politically allocate capital in the country, pick winners and losers. We were very critical of him for doing that. Solyndra et al. This is a similar version of this. Look, these companies are not leaving the United States because they're anti-American or they want to stick it to Indiana. They're following the laws of economics. It's too expensive to do business here. So Mr. Trump has a choice. He can go from company to company, thousands of them, and sort of beat all of them into submission and threaten them with tariffs, or focus, and I think that this is what he is going to do, on macroeconomic policy like cutting taxes and cutting back regulations.
But he is also talking about tariffs and punitive taxes. I mean, that's part of, in fact, we should say he's on a Twitter storm this morning, and he's talking about that some more.
Look, if you're going to talk about the long-term economy and how you keep businesses here, there's I think a real risk here that if you start doing that and saying that people aren't going to build their businesses in the United States in the first place because they'll be too worried about what they have to do if they want to leave. And so, I mean, this is something governors do, but the President of the United States has got more resources to do bigger policy.
I want to play another clip from Mr. Trump's speech at that Cincinnati rally on Thursday night. Here it is.
The era of economic surrender is over. We're going to fight for every last American job. It's time to remove the rust from the Rust Belt and usher in a new industrial revolution. We're going to do it.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Twitter from someone named Steelers Slob. For taxpayers, is it better for the government to assist businesses, or is it better for the free market to weed out the weak? Lisa, we should point out that all this happened on the same week that the unemployment rate hit a 9-year low of 4.6%. But how do you answer Steelers Slob?
Well, I think a lot of people...
And I want you to use his name in answering.
Well, Steelers Slob. I think a lot of people in Washington would pick the latter, would say the free market. And you see that in the reaction to this Carrier deal. It wasn't just the Wall Street Journal editorial board that took issue with it. So did Bernie Sanders. So did Larry Summers. So did Sarah Palin. So I think what we are seeing, what Washington can take away from this decision by Mr. Trump is that this is a new brand of politics. This is going to be Trumpism, not Republicanism, not Democratic-ism, but Trumpism. And so I think that's certainly sending a little bit of a chill and a little bit of a sense of foreboding up to the Capitol Hill up there, because people don't quite know what they can expect other than something fairly unpredictable.
Monica, I want to turn to another subject I talked about with Kellyanne, and that was President-elect Trump's phone calls with foreign leaders, especially with the president of Taiwan. You heard the question I asked her. Should he be better briefed? Should he be accepting State Department briefings? Should he be taking the presidential daily brief that most president-elects usually get every day, and Mike Pence is apparently getting every day? Should he be getting all of the briefings he can before he steps into this world of diplomatic nuance?
Well, the president-elect is getting regular briefings from people he trusts, experts like General Flynn, who will be the incoming national security advisor. He's incredibly well briefed before he takes these phone calls. The phone call with the Taiwanese president was a congratulatory phone call. My understanding, it was only about 10 minutes. They discussed a range of issues, but I think Donald Trump was elected not to reinforce the status quo, but to shake up the status quo, to challenge the conventional ways of doing things. This conversation, look, Donald Trump understands the one China policy very well. There will be plenty of time to discuss the whole range of issues regarding China and the Pacific Rim once he is sworn in. But what he also understands is that it is important for the president-elect and then the president of the United States to stand for freedom and to stand with those who challenge those who would oppress them, and that includes the Chinese government. So I don't know what his policy will be with regard to China once he is president of the United States. But what I do know is he felt that it was incredibly important to send a signal that yes, that he will take a whole new look at the range of issues.
So, Juan, are you persuaded by Monica, or, I mean, is the media making too big a deal of these phone calls?
No, but let me just say, I think to his supporters, there's not much that Donald Trump can do at this point that would cause them some offense. I mean, the idea is that we shouldn't take him literally, that he's acting on a symbolic level, whether it's with Carrier or with the phone calls. The problem is that in terms of the journalism, the intelligence community, the national security community, the diplomatic community here in Washington is alarmed by this. We have a one China policy. This has been in place since Richard Nixon. To suddenly go outside of that. You mentioned not taking the daily briefings, but it's also not then consulting with state, for example, the State Department, about how do I prepare to talk if I'm deciding I'm going to do this and I'm going to change the policy. How do I talk to this person in an effective way? We've already seen China file a formal complaint about the call. So clearly it's had an impact there. Even if I was to sit here and say to you, no big deal, it's having an impact in terms of our global relationships. And going forward, there are questions about, well, what about his business dealings? As you know, came up this week, so that you have ethics people here in Washington saying, oh, well, he should make sure that he is totally divested. But Trump has not agreed to that. And when he's meeting with Prime Minister Abe of Japan and brings in his daughter, when he's talking to the British about windmills near his golf courses, people are like, what is going on here?
Well, I think this uproar is totally overwrought, okay? I mean, a lot of this is being driven by State Department functionaries who are very unhappy that Donald Trump is not coming to them and they are not being allowed to formulate all American policy. By the way, that was what he was elected to do to a certain extent. And I think the other point is that you got to look at what Donald Trump says, that also what he does. To me, the far more important message that got sent this week to the world was the appointment or the naming of Mad Dog Mattis as Secretary of Defense. Now, if I was Pyongyang or Tehran, that's what I'd be paying attention to, because this is a very clear-eyed general who understands world politics very well and is going to be a lot tougher than this current administration.
All right, but before we end this segment, Lisa, I want to get to you because you were at this forum at Harvard about, rehashing the campaign. How ugly did it get?
It got pretty ugly. I think it's important to talk about what this normally is. This is normally a very staid affair where the campaign managers sip coffee and eat canapes as they discuss their
canapes,
strategy.
That's good right there.
The catering is excellent. As they discuss their strategy for, for the historical record. That's not what this was. This felt almost like a collective nervous breakdown. It wasn't just ugliness between the two campaigns, who really were reduced to shouting on numerous occasions at each other. Republican campaign managers heckled CNN President Jeff Zucker, pollster Nate Silver came in for some heckling. So there was a lot of tension there, and I think it really shows how raw these divides still are, and it certainly sends a little bit of a foreboding sign for our politics going forward. It doesn't feel like there's going to be an awful lot of kumbaya moments in our future, but maybe we'll all be pleasantly surprised.
30 seconds. Monica, you surprised that the Clinton camp is still so bitter?
They are extremely bitter. I was talking to some people who on the Trump transition, people who served on the campaign, and I think they're a little surprised that it still remains so raw. The challenge for President-elect Donald Trump, and this was one of his core messages during the campaign, was that he was going to try to unify the country, bring everybody together. I think the one way, the most effective way for him to do that is to create a booming economy. If the economy is roaring, that will likely silence a lot of his critics.
All right, panel, we have to take a break here. When we come back, President-elect Trump's allies go to court to block vote recounts in 3 states. We'll talk with Green Party presidential nominee Dr. Jill Stein, who's pushing the recount effort. Next. Technically still hasn't. A recount is currently underway in Wisconsin, with additional challenges in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Joining us now to discuss her push for the recounts is Green Party presidential nominee Dr. Jill Stein. Dr. Stein, you say that your goal here is not to change the results of the election, but to ensure the accuracy of the count. My question is, why then did you choose 3 states that Mr. Trump won narrowly, but not a state that Secretary Clinton won much more narrowly, New Hampshire, which she won by only 3,000 votes?
We didn't go into New Hampshire mainly because the deadline for filing a recount had passed. But in fact, at the time that we launched the recount, 2 of the states had gone to Donald Trump. Michigan was still uncertain as to which direction it would go. And as far as I'm concerned, if we do find evidence that there's a systemic problem here with these machines, which are extremely unreliable, prone to error and human error and machine error, as well as to hacking and security breaches, if we find evidence that there is a systemic problem, we need to expand the recount. In my view, that's what the American voters are calling for, a election result and a voting system that we can have confidence in.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Stein. Do you know the largest switch of votes in a recount in American political history?
Well, I can tell you one, for example, in Toledo in 2004, there were 90,000 votes that were marked blank, which were discovered actually not to be blank at all, and those when a hand recount was done. And that would have been enough to have changed the outcome in Ohio. Unfortunately, that wasn't found until after the election was already called.
Let me tell you, the biggest actual switch of votes in any election in U.S. history was back in 2000, when roughly 1,200 votes were switched from Bush to Gore. We're talking about 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, that Donald Trump won by more than 10,000 votes. There's not a chance in the world here, Dr. Stein, that the vote is going to change in those 3 states.
Chris, actually in Michigan, there are 75,000 votes which are blank, which are sky high compared to all other past elections. They are concentrated in Detroit. That's 75,000 votes, which may very well be machine error or human error. That is about 7 times the margin of difference in Michigan. So these results could in fact change the outcome, but we don't know that until we actually examine the evidence, and that means a hand recount of the ballots. That is going forward in Wisconsin.
It's never happened. There's never been a 70,000 vote switch. The most there's ever been is 1,247. Let me ask you.
That's actually not true. If the recounts were done in time, they could affect 90,000, and in fact, in Detroit, there could very well be 75,000.
I'm talking, Dr. Stein, about recounts that actually happened, not ones that could have happened.
That's because we don't do them, and in fact, we should do them. That's how we ensure that we have a system we can trust. And right now, as you know, Chris, cynicism and distrust is running wild. We need to address the fundamental concerns that the American voters are expressing.
Dr. Stein, let's talk about what a lot of people think is the real point here, and that is, let's take a look at how much money you raised in your presidential runs. In 2012, you raised $893,000 in your presidential campaign. In 2016, $3.5 million. But for this recount, you've raised more than $6.5 million from almost 140,000 donors. Isn't that what this is really about, Dr. Stein, using this recount to raise lots of money and build your list of supporters?
Let's be very clear. This money is going strictly into a segregated account, which can only be spent on the recount. So this money is will be completely used, and we'll be lucky if we can cover the costs at the rate that there is a bait and switch going on here. In Wisconsin, we just saw the costs triple. So to my mind, it really underscores why we need a fundamentally secure voting system that has built-in safeguards, that should have automatic audits, recounts. We need to get rid of these voting machines, these electronic touch screens, which have been proven highly vulnerable to tampering, to hacking, to human and machine errors.
So the fact that you have 140,000 donors is purely coincidental, Dr. Stein?
Well, put it this way. The American people have made it very clear what they want done here. Chris, coming out of this election,
wait. I don't think the American people... Wait, where do you get off saying the American people... Where do you get off saying that the American people are calling for this? I think the vast majority of the American people think we should accept the result of the election.
80% of Americans said that they were disgusted with this election. And we know that about 90% of Americans
it may have been the choice they had. I don't think it was the system or demand for a recount.
This is a time that people have an entire loss of faith in our political institutions. The way that the money is coming in from small donors makes it very clear. And in fact, a poll just last week showed the American people support the recount, and that they feel that if Donald Trump was in the reverse position, he would be doing exactly the same thing. Remember, he said that it was a rigged system and that he was not going to accept the result. So he has articulated what many Americans feel. It's time to respect the views of the American voter and ensure that we have a voting system.
Well, some would say that the views of the American voter were that Donald Trump was elected president. You've now decided if I may ask my question, Dr. Stein, you've now decided to go to the federal court to try to get a recount in Pennsylvania after the state court said that you would have to post, or your supporters would have to post, $1 million bond, and you said they can't afford that. You're going to hold a news conference tomorrow in front of Trump Tower. What's he got to do with it?
We want to hold this conference where America will see that we are standing up for everyday Americans who do not have confidence in this election system, who have lost confidence actually in our political system. And we are standing up loud and strong to say that we will not be intimidated. We will not be frightened by having to jump through all these legal hoops. We say, what is Donald Trump frightened of? Because he is obstructing, he is delaying these cases.
How many votes did you get? Dr. Stein, how many votes did you get in this election?
Excuse me, how many votes did Donald Trump get? He got about 2.5 million less votes.
He got 62.5 million votes.
Less votes than Hillary Clinton. So I think the American people are
How many votes did you get, Dr. Stein?
Explanation here of what is going
Dr. Stein,
on.
Could you answer the question?
Know until you look at the evidence.
How many votes did you get?
I am not going to be the beneficiary of this one way or the other. That's why I can do this, because I am a nonpartisan.
But he got 62.5 million votes. How many did you get? I mean, the question really is, who's speaking for American voters? Him or you? This is not
about Donald Trump. It's not about Hillary Clinton. It's not about my campaign. It's not about Gary Johnson. This is about the American voters who deserve to have a voting system we can trust. When something like 75,000 votes in Detroit may in fact be an error, because why would people come out in Detroit, fill in all the other positions, but not vote for president?
Dr. Stein,
this is a little bit suspicious. We deserve to know what's going on, because that could in fact change the outcome of the vote in Michigan.
The third presidential debate, Dr. Stein, I asked Donald Trump whether he would accept the result of the election and the principle of the peaceful transfer of power. Here's what he said. Are you saying you're not prepared now to commit to that principle?
What I'm saying is that I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Well,
okay?
Chris, let me respond to that, because that's horrifying. You know, every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him.
Dr. Stein, at that time, a lot of liberals' heads exploded because Donald Trump wouldn't accept the results of the election. Aren't you doing precisely that right now? Aren't you doing exactly what Hillary Clinton called horrifying?
I am not here to help Hillary Clinton or to express her point of view. In my view, the recount should have happened in the Democratic primary as well, where there were also very suspicious results, where voters appeared to be stripped from the rolls in Brooklyn, where hundreds of thousands of votes went uncounted in California. This is not about helping Democrats. It's not about helping Republicans.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you what, that's not the question I asked you, Dr. Stein. I asked you why not accept the results of the election, because what you're doing is exactly what Hillary Clinton said was horrifying.
I don't care what Hillary Clinton thinks about this, and I care what the voters think about this, not what the politicians or the pundits or the party operatives think about this. This is about responding to the American voters who are standing up and saying, we deserve an election system that we can trust, and that is accurate, that is secure against hacking, against human error, against machine error, and that in which the votes are being counted. Because right now, it's not clear that all the votes are being counted. We deserve that, Stein, so we can go forward with an election system that we can trust.
Dr. Stein, thank you. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll stay on top of the recount. Up next, we'll bring back the panel. What's next for the Democrats after Nancy Pelosi was reelected to lead her party in the House? Plus, what do you think? Why are Democrats sticking with Pelosi despite their election losses? Let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and use the hashtag FNS.
Bringing my step today because this opportunity is a special one to lead the House Democrats, bring everyone together as we go forward.
Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi reacting to her re-election as House Minority Leader after beating back a challenge from Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan. And we're back now with the panel. Well, House Democrats have had a bad run under Pelosi. Let's take a look. After the 2008 election, when Barack Obama won, they held 257 seats in the House. But after this election on November 8th, they now hold 194. That's a loss of 63 seats. Juan, how do you explain, given that record, House Democrats putting her back as their leader?
She's a tremendous fundraiser. There's just no question about it. And secondly, in this environment where you just had, potentially the first woman for the presidency defeated, on the Democratic side, I think women on the Hill have rallied to her support. And don't forget, so much of the base of the party in Congress comes from California, the West Coast, and the East Coast. So she's there for them. She'll do it. Tim Ryan, who was running against her, as you pointed out, from Ohio, said he could reach out, do better with blue-collar voters. But in fact, his legislative record is not that distinct. I think the best argument here is if you look at Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, Steny Hoyer. These are all politicians in their 70s who, as you say, have suffered defeat after defeat and the decimation of Democrats on Capitol Hill, and also, by the way, in state governments around the country. Also, another point to be made is the people who vote Democratic these days, disproportionately millennials, young people, they voted overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. And yet they don't see it represented in this leadership, all in their 70s, and who don't seem to be in touch with a new, more vibrant message, more of that kind of energetic activist message.
So you're saying they did it for the old reasons, the old-fashioned inside political reasons, but in terms of appealing to the country in the future, not so smart.
Not so smart. And the question is, how do you then get this older group that's ensconced and has the money, because you're going to have to rebuild the party. There's an argument now about who's going to run the Democratic National Committee.
Get to that.
So the question is, how do you rebuild, and what is the message going forward? Just sitting on the sidelines as a journalist, I don't see that these folks are the ones that you would want to entrust with that new message.
So, Kim, let me bring you into this conversation. I mean, it was clear from this election that House Democrats do not have a message that resonates with millions of American voters, millennials, working class, rural. Why do you think they kept Pelosi?
I mean, part of this is Nancy Pelosi's failure, and for all of those reasons, has solidified her role there. At this point, 1/3 of all House Democrats hail from just 3 states in the country: New York, Massachusetts, and California. Everyone that was an opposing voice in that caucus has been driven out of the party, lost elections because of the very liberal governance of Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and Barack Obama. So there are no voices left. Of course they reelected her because this is what's left of the party, believes that Nancy Pelosi is correct, even though she's 4 for 4 out there. It was amazing. When I listened to that Harvard Forum, the most extraordinary thing that came out of that was Democrats with their heads in the sand about why they lost this. They will not be honest with themselves. They believe it was Jim Comey, that the media was mean to them, that they didn't get their message out. That's not why they lost. They lost because people disagree with their policy.
Well, let's talk about another potential face of the Democratic Party that Juan alluded to, and that's the front runner to be the new chair of the Democratic National Committee, Congressman Keith Ellison, the first Muslim elected to Congress. Monica, the Anti-Defamation League says that a speech that Ellison made in 2010, in which he basically said U.S. foreign policy is run out of Israel, they call that speech, quote, disqualifying. So what does it say that he may be the front runner to be the face of the Democratic Party?
And that's one problematic example with Representative Ellison. In addition, in the past, he's called for a separate black state in America, and he also has very close ties to CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which some argue may be a front group for the Muslim Brotherhood. So, look, he is politically very far out there on the left, and the fact that the Democratic Party is now seriously considering him as its head tells you where the party is. This is no longer Bill Clinton's Democratic Party. This is Barack Obama's Democratic Party. Obama, over the last 8 years, has taken the party, moved it from center left all the way to the far left. And it turns out that the coalition that elected him and re-elected him was unique to him. And that without him on the ticket, they suffered massive losses, 2010, 2014, and now 2016. And a big part of this, which gets to what we were talking about earlier with the carrier deal and so on, is that Democrats have ignored, blown off, disrespected the working class. And it's not the first time they have done this. These people who came out for Donald Trump, a lot of them independents and Democrats, disaffected from their own party because they can't relate to them anymore, came out for Richard Nixon in 1968 and 72, came out for Ronald Reagan, the old Reagan Democrats. And unless and until this Democratic Party leaves behind Barack Obama and his doctrinaire leftism, they're going to continue to suffer these kind of electoral defeats.
I want to end this segment by talking about our previous guest, Jill Stein. Lisa, what do you make of her recount effort? What's this all about?
Well, look, Hillary Clinton's campaign did a very extensive assessment of voting irregularities and all, the vote in all the states. They investigated every theory that people presented to them. They brought in outside academics, technologists, all kinds of people, and they found no evidence of any kind of systemic flaw in the system, whether it's hacking or failed machines or anything like that. So this is very, very, very unlikely to change the results of this election. So you have to wonder, why is Jill Stein pursuing this so hard? Now, of course, the integrity of our elections is very important, but I think this is good business for Jill Stein. Even though the money is in a separate account, she compiles a list of supporters that she can then take. That's what third parties need to build up their brand. On the flip side, Donald Trump is acting very aggressively to stop these recounts, and you kind of have to wonder why he's doing that as well, given that it's unlikely to change the outcome. In the words of a Disney princess, you sort of wonder why he doesn't just let it go, because it sort of feels like
wow, a Frozen reference there. That's a first.
Because if he's creating a certain amount of smoke around it as well, that I think could make some people wonder whether there's something real here. They may find some kind of irregularities, but it's unlikely to have an impact on who the president is going to be.
If I could interject here, I think that the real answer to your question would be ballot access, building a third party, a Green Party that's stronger. She said the money's segregated now in a separate account, but I think that what you're going to find is that once we go beyond this, she's going to say, you know what, the Green Party's stronger. It is the voice of people who were Bernie Sanders supporters on the left, and that we are building a structure that will allow us to be a successful, and that would be the first time, a successful third-party operation in 2020.
And he does, he can send lawyers to monitor it, but sending lawyers to monitor is one thing, suing to stop it completely is another.
No, I think it would be criminal malpractice for Donald Trump not to take this incredibly seriously, because it's the thing. Look, there's one reason Jill Stein's doing this. She was just on her show for 10 minutes. That's more time than she's ever had on any network. So,
actually, we had her during the campaign.
Yeah, that's fair.
We had her before.
But this is Jill Stein's moment. She's building for the next presidential run.
And it would also be political malpractice, not for Donald Trump, to try to resist some of this, because the whole point, people say that the recount is pointless. The whole point is to try to delegitimize the election. I mean, Donald Trump is the clear winner. It's trying to sow seeds of doubt and create a narrative that the left can dine out on for the next 4 years.
Oh, come on.
All right. Wow, I'm glad we got this much discussion about Jill Stein. And a reference, the only time that my granddaughter will have ever understood anything that was said Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday. Up next, our Power Player of the Week, Puppy Love, how veterans train therapy dogs and in the process are healing themselves.
There's 30,000 years or so of proven history behind the man's best friend.
Hey, good boy.
Rick Yount is the founder of the Warrior Canine Connection, a unique program that taps into the healing power of dogs. Disabled veterans have been getting service dogs for decades. Yount decided who better to train those dogs than other vets suffering from post-traumatic stress or brain injury.
That human-animal bond has worked better than any other intervention that I'm aware of.
Wait, better than drugs? Better than talking?
Yes. I was asked, how soon does it take for you to see effect in the service members you're working with? It's usually about 5 minutes.
Ready? Let's go. Good boy.
Retired Army Specialist Christian Santos was injured in Afghanistan in 2013. His nurse said training dogs like Cody could help him.
Depression, anxiety, PTSD. And I was really like, didn't want to socialize with other people. So she said, try the service dogs program.
Push. Good job. Yes, good boy.
Yount says in teaching the dogs, starting as puppies, the vets teach themselves that the world is a safe place.
These veterans have to challenge their intrusive thoughts. That dumpster door slamming was an ID. No, it was just a dumpster door.
Oh, you're so good. Oh, you're so good.
And to show positive emotion, Yount recalls one story.
Learning how to praise this dog and the patience that I've learned in training this dog has really taught me how to connect with my son on a 3-year-old level, and it's saved my marriage.
Rick Yount was a social worker 20 years ago when he brought his dog Gabe on a job, driving a sobbing child to foster care. The crying stopped.
What I saw was a 4-month-old golden retriever puppy with his head in this little boy's leg, and he was petting this dog.
Now, Yount uses Gabe's 12-year-old son Huff for therapy.
Really, since he was about 12 weeks old, he started working with folks, and he's still doing it today.
At any one time, the Warrior Canine Connection has 30 vets training 65 dogs at 4 sites across the country. Yount says the dogs can tell their trainer's emotional state.
If the leg is bouncing, we train the dogs to come over and lay their head on the veteran's leg. And then we train the veterans who receive the dogs to keep the training going and pet the dog. So it's kind of like a self-licking ice cream cone.
Over the last 5 years, almost 4,000 vets have helped train these dogs. And Yount says, helped heal themselves.
I know this has been the difference between life and death by many of the veterans. There's no question about it. I had one Marine that took 10 different medications. He couldn't sleep.
And then they spend time with one of these dogs?
We had the dog stay overnight with him. And the first night he had the dog, he had 6 hours straight through.
Yount wants to scale up his program to serve 48,000 vets over the next 10 years and open 10 new sites. 70% of the funding comes from private donations. If you want to learn more, please go to our website, foxnewssunday.com. And that's it for today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Fox News Sunday.
Hey, if you like this video, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. It really helps get the message out there, and it really motivates me to make more videos. Thanks a lot.